Upstream Benefits shows the variety and diversity of artists. There's a breadth of expression that is contained in this show that's very representative of what's going on in this area.
This exhibition represents a survey of our history of artist-run culture, primarily located around the Oxygen Art Centre. Oxygen Touchstones are co-presenting this show, and this body of work is indicative of people who have really put in extra effort and helped further artist-run culture in addition to their own artistic practice.
And the themes were more fleshing out how artists create the culture that they also benefit from. People involved in Touchstones or Oxygen or any Kootenays Gallery, the Langham, all of these different places, they create these organizations or are patrons of them, and then having that infrastructure helps them have careers here.
And we really started to look very sort of self-reflexively at how we do create art and why and how location and place affect our art.
That also led into how can we show that in an exhibition, which is where the call and response idea came from, with rooting an earlier piece of artwork to something that was created later in your career.
We live in this beautiful wild place, and we have time to create, and we have both independence and a sense of community. And so this is how we've located ourselves and titled our show.
I think it's going to be a challenging show in some ways because it wraps itself around a theme and it doesn't have visual continuity necessarily.
The artist statements that talk about this connection and this place and this practice are really fabulous. A lot of thought and time has gone into them. They really, I think, help tie in all of the elements.
And I hope people also see how creative expression comes at questions from completely different places.
This show, I was really glad to be part of it because it's all artists who've been really involved in the community, in the arts community, in teaching, in many, many different ways, in setting up shows, curating shows, all that kind of thing. When you start to get artists, certain number into a community, more come, right? Because then you start showing together, you bounce ideas off each other, you start teaching, you learn from each other. I see this show as a group of those people, and I'm involved with them. I went to Emily Carr, right? In the early work I was doing everything with the body, humans, a lot of images of people as I thought they wanted to see themselves, full portraits with a background that involves them. And then I found living here, because you are so much dealing with nature, that had to change, right? So then I found myself, that I had to deal with nature, just had to, like become Canadian and deal with nature. So the first work, I was documenting the creek edge where I got my water. And I was kind of concerned about changes in the environment that are happening with global warming. And the later ones, again, I'm thinking about landscape, but now I got this idea of the Anthropocene period in my mind, that the humans have changed Earth, and it's not going back to where it was. So I decided I would do still life. I'm Dutch, right? So I love these Dutch 17th century art, and I thought, okay, I'll try and do that, and I'll put nature as a reflection in human-made things. So that's what I was doing with these.
This piece is called Hip-F/Platonic Void. It's from a body of work that I showed at Oxygen in 2006. It's a hand-built ceramic piece. All the pieces were made putting them over, draping clay over body parts, and then finding what form would stand up as they got larger. The piece behind me is called Elephant Mountain Revisited, and between 2006 and when I finished this one a couple of weeks ago in 2017, there have been 3 or 4 different bodies of work, but I always seem to keep returning to this idea of draping and layers and shadows. And the forms underneath were actually experiments that I did in 2010. And the layering on top is using a Sericola method that I learned from Bridget Corkery's recipe that I think also came from Courtney Anderson, who's also in the show, which kind of leads into the community that we are. To me, it's an interesting manifestation of all these people's work from 10 years ago to today, and just seeing these transformations. It's very much about community and having a resource locally to actually bounce ideas off and get new ideas from.
This piece is called Pain, Tattered Spine, and it's an elegy to my grandmother, Grace, who made the quilt, which is now over 100 years old. So I wanted to use the quilt because it is so tattered, and I am interested in tatters. I supported it on a cross, which is reference to her faith. There's this sacred scarred heart in the center of the bundle, and the organza that flows through is like her spirit and what we have now. There's a cement concrete uterus in silk fiber and liquid vinyl. And it relates to the other piece that I made in 2002 from tatters on a wooden ironing board I bought at a secondhand store. Took all the sheets that were on top and put them in the washing machine, and they became these wonderful tatters that I was going to use for rags, but then I ended up making about 40 pieces from these compositions of the stain, the water stains over the years. And I assumed it was from the Kootenay lake. Oxygen began just a year before I made that first piece. We were called the Nelson Fine Arts Center, and it's a minor miracle that it's so strong still. And so this show, to my mind, is a wonderful celebration of the fact that we kept on this long, and there isn't a lot of support for a rural artist-run center. It's really artist-run. And I think that's a really important thing to celebrate and to acknowledge.
The work I've chosen to put in Upstream Benefits here. Put an older piece in and then two fairly recent pieces. And the older piece is work that showed when Oxygen first opened about 15 years ago in the space we're in now. It's called The Maternal Body, The Paradox of Desire. And it was the body of a dead mother squirrel actually juxtaposed with my naked body. So this is actually a little bit of a self-portrait done on rabbit skin glue. And at that time I was working largely with the figure, and the figure would inform my narrative. Right away it would become the dominant narrative. In the last few years I've tried to move my work away from the narrative in my work, or from the dominance of the narrative, and push it to the back. And to do that, I've changed my process of working, and I work from stencils. So I hand draw and hand cut stencils out of various papers and then apply the imagery with stencil. The narrative is still there, but I think it comes forward more integrated in the whole pictorial space. You know, these are people that I've spent the last 15 years quite closely enmeshed with, or in a working relationship. And many of us founded the Oxygen Art Center. It was a bit of a nostalgia, thinking that we've all, against all odds, chosen to build our careers here, and the compromises that go with that, being in a place that's so small, so isolated. And I feel like the responsibility has been on us to create the culture we want.
So when I was asked to be part of Upstream Benefits, I decided to put in Roundtable, which is a work from 2008 that showed at Oxygen when I was an artist in residence. And it was really my first step into doing installation work with new media. And I created a conversation using a bunch of TVs between different people in the community. And I thought I would look at where we were as a community and what perspectives people brought to that. Because I really value the differing opinions that we have in a small town and how we all come to things from a different place, and we really need that kind of conversation to keep our social fabric kind of evolving over time. And so that's been a theme that carried through to my most recent work, which is called ARC, intended for a large-scale projection, but here on a TV in Upstream Benefits, it's 5 short vignettes. I looked at how to use 2 photos to tell a story and not use narrative as much as I had in the traditional sense of people talking, but actually using sound and animation, letting the visual piece drive the themes that have always been really important to me, which is about home and our sense of place and how things change over time from an individual and community standpoint. I guess I didn't even really identify as an artist when I moved to Nelson and the Kootenays, and it was through meeting all these people in this room and other artists that I started to really look at myself that way and to take myself more seriously and to actually have a practice. And I think so many people move here and they start to see how they can also contribute to the artist-run community that we have. It's really how we've held each other in a community as artists and knowing that that's where it's actually happening. It's not somewhere else, it's right here.
The themes I generally focus on are environmental and historical themes. The majority of my reclaimed materials are locally sourced, which is important to the work. I've always likened it to the 100-mile diet, and mine's kind of the 100-mile material. The assignment for Upstream Benefits was an early piece followed by a newer work, and I chose for this a selection from my Piece of the Pie series. And that is this sculpture right here, which is World Petroleum Consumption Study. Piece of the Pie basically explores the growth of consumption. And in this piece, this series, I use opposing pie charts to scale representing statistics. This piece up here is from my Blunt Force Illumination series, which follows a piece of the pie. This piece is titled Carbon Neutral. It's kind of a series of hope in which I believe through legislation and/or design we can achieve a sustainable environment. Oxygen Art Center for me has always represented my peer network, and I've always seen it as almost like a guild for West Kootenay artists. We live in a very isolated region, and despite the fact that we are more connected to the world with the internet now, it is still really comforting and inspiring to have a closely knit group of practicing artists in the region.
It's really important for me to be part of Upstream Benefits and to be part of Oxygen Art Center. I think that for one thing, it's about artists being able to determine for themselves what happens with their work. And so artist-run culture is really about saying, we don't have to wait. I've got 2 pieces in the show. So the first one is called Piecing. It's part of a work that I made in 2013-14. My world kind of collapsed. My mom died. The house that I was living in was sold. A contract at the university ran out. all within a 2-week period. And so I was going through all my papers, through my papers and my mom's papers. And as the shredded paper grew up, I thought, I have to do something with this. And so I started playing with it, and it helped carry me through a rough time in my life until I could get back on my feet again. And then the second piece is more about trying to make sense of the crazy world we're living in right now. It's about learning how to be at ease with all that chaos and find our own ground within the chaos. For example, my one piece here, I've got tiles on the floor that I'm encouraging people to walk on, and that's sort of a symbol of learning to walk on shaky ground. And I've got these kind of objects that are kind of a reflection of how I feel with, you know, like right now everybody's nerves are all stretched, and it's about learning to take in that chaos and yet not being upended by it. It's definitely about feminism and about what's happening right now with women and the whole Me Too campaign, but it's also just about climate change and about all the craziness in the world. The objects that I create are kind of shocking, they're kind of different and strange, but there's also a sense of real humor and play in them. And so for me, it's important that we learn to bring a lightness to what's happening in the world.
When I first started painting, I started to use grid and repetition in ways that I didn't realize came from my experience of working for many years as a carpenter. And after I did this piece, Weeks 31, I realized what I was doing. I had taken that structure and I'd used it to make an abstract idea visually there. So I was learning about abstraction. After making this piece, I began to use lines and grid more intentionally, and carefully constructed restraints became part of my practice. When I decided to do another piece based on that years, it also is concerned with the same thing about passing time and how time changes everything. I just took it to a little more solidified form and had found in the meantime ways to try to make a structure hold more than just the visual shape. I want my paintings to encourage viewers to stretch their understanding of what can be presented in a painting. Oxygen Art Center was key to my growth as an artist. The opportunities to see other local artists and their work and the encouragement that they gave me helped me to believe that I could actually make work that came from my own experience and from my own vision. And my first public exhibit at a public gallery was at Oxygen. I spent a year producing a body of work and thinking about it and talking about it, and that really made me believe that I could actually do this.